Okay, we're going to open this session of the Hingham Zoning Board of Appeals. It is March 28th. The time is 7:05. And the first item on our agenda is SEB Hingham LLC for a comprehensive permit under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40B, for the construction of a 20-unit home ownership housing development, including 4 affordable housing units within 10 different buildings to be called The Village on Main, on approximately 12.72 acres of land at 895 to 901 Main Street in Residence District B. The parcels of land are identified on assessor's maps as 168-99 and 168-100. Let me just establish some ground rules for the meeting this evening. First, we are being recorded twice, once by the board for purposes of the open meeting law, and second by a television crew. I think it's television, or at least it's some media, which is why we have these mics. And later on, when we ask for comments from the abutters or neighbors, there's a microphone up there that you should use. And in fact, the applicant and their counsel, I would ask that they use that mic as well so it can be properly recorded. There are some items that are going to be reviewed and displayed. If someone has trouble seeing what's there, please get up, move around, and make sure that you can see what you need to see so that the information is conveyed effectively to you. So with that, I would ask who is here to represent the applicant. If you could just state your name for the record, please.
Bob Engler of SEB. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the audience, my name is Bob Engler. I'm the president of SEB LLC, the parent corp, if you will, of the LLC created for this development purpose. Just a few words on us before I turn it over to my son Jeff, who's going to handle the presentation. Just a couple of words on SEB so people know who we are. We're a small family company. There's one other son who's not here tonight, and that's pretty much the partnership. We have represented the major developers in the country that have come into Massachusetts over the last 40 years and permitted and been involved in permitting on both the town side and on the development side of several thousand units at this point for over the last 35 years. So, and we've had several in Hingham as well, so we're not new to the town. We've run lotteries for first-time home buyers and renters and been on the permitting side of a few developments in town. So we are familiar with the town, we're familiar with the 40B process. We certainly have been involved enough times. We think we found, as we search all the time for good sites and good locations and good towns, we think we have one. And we're happy to present to you tonight and respond to questions and concerns. And at that, I'll turn it over to my son Jeff to talk about the project and the team. Thank you very much.
Before you begin, and I am looking forward to your presentation, and I know members of the audience are as well, procedurally, where this board stands with respect to the entire 40B process, I want to make sure that we're all up front, and this is not meant to stop or curtail your presentation. In fact, it's important that the information get out and that people in the community are aware of what's being proposed. But this board has taken the view that the town has exceeded the 10% affordable housing unit requirement. We had previously taken that position with DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. They did not agree. That went on to appeal with the HAC, the Housing Appeals Committee. They remanded it back here, saying that we had not yet established it. We had not carried our burden of proof. And they said, continue with the hearing. That was with respect to the Avalon Bay project. And they would revisit it once we, in fact, continued and finished that review. And it would go back up to the Housing Appeals Committee. And from there, if the town wasn't satisfied, it could be appealed to the courts. So we are in the middle of that process. It's been stayed. So there has not been a final determination in that case. And so we are back again with the process of making clear our view and this board's view that the town has reached the 10% requirement. It would be very convenient for this applicant and for others if there was a final resolution of that issue. Where we're at is, there is not such a final resolution. And so it's not as if we would like you to be held in suspense, but we need to go through the appropriate process. So we will look at that and consider that after your presentation. Your presentation will inform us about exactly what's being proposed, how it will affect the community, and we'll certainly give abutters and neighbors a chance to comment on their views about how will it affect the community. But I just want to be upfront as to how we're going to be proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Jeff Engler. I also represent SEB Hingham LLC and SEB. One distinction I think it's important to recognize relative to some of our projects that we've been involved with in Hingham before is this is an SEB project. Previously, we've been retained by other developers. In this case, it's our project. The buck stops with us. We're responsible exclusively for the decisions and for making good on the assurances and promises to the town and the neighborhood. I think that's important to recognize. I'd like to introduce our team tonight to talk about land use and site planning. We have Mike Sardina from the firm of Brown Sardina. To talk about traffic, we have Dan Mills from MDM Transportation. We have Bill Buckley from the Bay Colony Group, who's our civil engineer, who will be talking about civil engineering issues, primarily stormwater management and the like. Jim Valleco from Grisato Valleco is our architect. Unfortunately, Jim's wife had a scheduled surgery today, so he is not here, but he is our architect. I'll be talking briefly about the architecture later on his behalf. So just a quick overview of our proposal before we get into more of the technical elements with our team. The site is 12.4 acres. Basically, there's about 4 buildable acres. We're bordered in the back by, shouldn't have had that last cup of coffee, I apologize. Bordered in the back by open space and wetlands. Our setback from Main Street is about 80 to 85 feet, which is in excess of what it is now. We're proposing 20 townhouses. Despite what the Patriot Ledger said last week, these are not 20 affordable units. It's 20 units in total, 16 market rate units and 4 affordable units. So there'll be 16 units here. All 20 will be provided with a high level of finish. We have every intention to make this a first-class community. For the units, as I mentioned, we're proposing to serve households up to 50% of area median income. So those would be quite affordable, certainly by Hingham standards, and will allow 4 households the opportunity for home ownership in this development. And as my father mentioned earlier, we are responsible for all the eligibility screening and whatnot. We've worked with the town on several projects. I think the Hingham Housing Authority, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe they feel good about our capacity in that role. The market units will be range from 2,100 to 2,500 square feet, which once again we think by Hingham standards compared to a lot of new construction is actually quite modest compared to a lot of the 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000 square foot homes that you see being built. Our target market is really people that live in Hingham now that don't want to live and maintain in a large single-family house. Many of the units have first-floor master bedrooms, so we're targeting, it's not an age-restricted development, but we are targeting people that want the conveniences of a single-level living. All units, and I'll talk about architecture a little bit later, but all units are 2 stories at the most. There's no living space on the 3rd floor of any kind. I mean, there's no 3rd floor, so So we think, once again, height-wise, contextually, it's appropriate compared to other houses in the neighborhood and other houses in Hingham in general. As you can see, our site is long and linear. We know there's a lot of sensitivity and concern relative about preserving the look and feel of Main Street. We're well aware of that. We do have a rendering of what the project will look like from Main Street. As it is long and linear, most of the development you're not going to be able to see from Main Street. That's not to say we aren't proud of it. We've developed it in the style of a New England village, and we think it's going to be quite attractive. In order for the project to be successful, we have to develop a very upscale, attractive project that people are going to want to live in. Relative to the road, we're proposing a private way, so all snow removal, garbage removal, common area landscaping, and the like will all be the responsibility of the homeowners association. It will not be the responsibility of the town of Hingham. So with that said, we'll talk a little bit later about more specific details of the units themselves. But with that, I'll turn it over to my team, who will speak more specifically and in detail about each component of our development.
Chairman, members of the board, my name is Mike Sardina, land planner and landscape architect, representing the firm of Brown Sardina in Boston. As Jeff was saying, the existing setback off the road for the existing building, which sits about right here, the existing home, is about 45 feet off the property line, and we're well 20 to 25 feet back of that existing home. The general layout of the terrain on this property slopes primarily from south to north. The dark green and light green lines represent sort of the upland from the lower land being designated wetland areas, and with that restrictions relative to our building capacity. The roadway basically is coming in off of Main Street in a place just about where the existing driveway curb cut exists. I think your battery's dying, Jeff. And the ground to the north of that drive is low, and the ground to the south of that drive is high. It's our intent at this point to leave that terrain. Okay, great, thanks. It's our intent to leave the terrain within this frontage off Main Street as much as possible as it is, in order to retain the existing trees that are in this area. The existing trees in this area will give us separation from Main Street to the first pair of buildings, as well as giving us opportunity for enhancing that landscape with additional new landscape, pretty much screening the buildings from the Main Street frontage. The terrain dropping on the roadway basically comes in where the existing driveway is, as I said, but it's also pretty much hugging a landform that is dropping off to the north. And what we've done here with siting these buildings is we've tried to sensitively place them relative to the terrain and not do a lot of additional unnecessary filling. So all these units along the north edge of the road and at the very western end of the cul-de-sac, they all have the capacity to have walkout basements. And rather than fill for a flat lot all the way through the footprint of the buildings, we're basically allowing the grades to slope between the buildings to the north and to the natural terrain that is adjacent to the property line, or in the zone of the edge of the wetlands. The units that are on the south side of the road are basically on higher ground. There is no capacity for the walkout basements here, and thus those will be just a standard basement situation. Each of these units has got a two-car garage. Each of these units has space for 2 vehicles to park in the driveway behind the sidewalk. The sidewalk is currently proposed to be along the north edge of the drive and terminates over on the south edge of the cul-de-sac. And as I mentioned, all of those units will have 2 additional parking spaces within the footprint of each of those building areas. The cul-de-sac itself has been designed in terms of its sizing to accommodate emergency vehicles. And the island in the middle, as Jeff had mentioned earlier, is intended to basically provide some relief in the amount of asphalt that would be out there. That currently the cul-de-sac is about 96 feet across. This area, the large area that you see up here, north of these groups of buildings, is essentially a zone set aside for the intended septic system on the property. The rest of the dark green here is pretty much landscape area. The septic system will be lawn, but basically the rest of the site is also being developed as a landscape system. And with that, I think what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Bill Buckley, who can talk about sort of site's infrastructure.
Before you do that, I just want to be clear on some things.
Sure.
You mentioned the front buildings, how they're set back from Main Street.
Yes.
What is the distance there, from the building to the front property line?
There's a slight skew, as you can see here.
Yeah,
This building here is almost 70 feet, and this one is between 65 and 70 feet, roughly 70 feet.
Okay.
The existing residence that is basically right in that zone right there,
Mhm.
the easterly edge of that is about 40 feet off the property line. There's an additional almost 20 feet of public right-of-way, which is the white zone between the roadway and the green, which is about 20 feet.
Okay. And how close to the other property line would the structures be?
The structures in this area are roughly 15 feet off the property line, and I think this corner down here is a little bit further, plus or minus 20. I don't know exactly what the number
Okay.
is. As you can see, they tend to vary. The intent is that the entry-level floor, the main floor of the unit, does have the ability to also have a deck off the backside. And all of these site plans are showing the option to have some sort of a patio at the ground level too. For instance, if there's a walkout basement, there could be a patio at the lower level as well as an option. And that's what you're actually seeing on these plans. You're not necessarily seeing the deck, although the patio locations are essentially mirroring where the deck could be above, but that hasn't been finally worked through as far as the architecture is concerned. Is that it? Bill?
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Bill Buckley, and I work for Bay Colony Group. And what I'm going to talk to you about this evening is the infrastructure for the project. Before I start that, though, I'll just talk a little bit about the site itself, the physical characteristics of it. As Mike pointed out, if you look at the map, this lighter green is the wetlands that have been delineated on the site. The site has gone through what's called the abbreviated notice of resource area delineation process, where a biologist has flagged the wetland, and we've gone before the Conservation Commission for them to confirm the limits of the wetland. And so you can see it's about 3.7 acres or so of the site is upland, and the remainder of the 12.4 acre site is wetland that stretches off to the west or to the left as we look at this plan. There we go. And let me the larger plan over here, the smaller scale plan, you can see it, and the property kind of I'm outlining it right now. It's 2 parcels of land. You can see how far it stretches over here to the west.
Yep.
And this is the upland area that we're talking about. The Eel River comes in from the south here, wraps around, heads west and goes off to the west. And then up here to the north, it's off the site, well off the site, and on the east side of the roadway is a Fulling Mill Pond watershed area as well. This site does lie within a Water Resource Protection District, a Zone 2 of the town's groundwater supply district. And further up here on the other side of the road is a Zone A, which is a surface water supply protection district, but doesn't have anything to do with this particular project. The site soils are listed as Quonset and Warwick. I know that means nothing. What it really means is the soils have been mapped by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Soil Conservation Service, and those type of soils are very gravelly. They pass water through them very quickly, and they generally have a deep groundwater or deep groundwater elevation. In order to confirm that, what we did is we went through the site and we did a series of 6 test holes down in this area here, and then we did 3 down here in the area of the proposed septic system, and then 3 more kind of following the roadway out. So 1 in the cul-de-sac, 1 up here on top of this bridge, and then a little bit further down. And all the soil tests that we did confirmed the mapping done by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We did find some groundwater indications down here. This is a lower area. Let me just talk about topography. I know Mike touched on it. The way the site works is, if you come in from up the driveway, it's about elevation 116. So that's 116 feet above sea level. And then it goes in, and then right in here, there's a depression. It definitely was gravelled out at some time. It's large. As you go up the ridge, up in here, the high point is about elevation 135, and then that drops off to the west, to the north, to the north. The wetland elevation is about elevation 94.5. One other thing to talk about here is, if you look on the flood maps, the FEMA flood maps that are published by FEMA, it shows the flood zone is going something like this. And that, it's probably a 20 or 30 foot elevation difference. You know that it's really not that. So what we've done is we've calculated what they call the base flood elevation and had FEMA certify that. So now we're working off a certified base flood elevation of 99, which is just a little bit, in most of the area, it's just a little bit inside the wetland line, which again is around 94.5, 95. So the site is going to be served by municipal water, or your town water servicer. And we've had discussions with them on the water we brought up. We'll bring an 8-inch line up from the existing 6-inch line that's in the street, and then run it to the end. There'll be 3 hydrants, 1 at the beginning, 1 in the middle, 1 at the end, be approximately 300 feet apart. All of the buildings will be served by their own water services, and we don't see any issues there as far as volume or pressure, but we will confirm that as we refine the design, and we will confirm the water pressure and volume. The site is also served by a septic system because there is no sewer in this area. So that limits us to, it's a limiting factor for the site because we are in a water resource zone 2, and we're limited under the state sanitary code to 1 bedroom or 110 gallons per day for every 10,000 square feet of area. So that limits the site to 54 bedrooms, which is what is shown on this particular plan. What we've chosen to do, and this is because of the density, we've chosen to create 1 septic system for the site. And as Mike pointed out, it's in this area. I know it's hard to see on this particular plan, but you can see the lines, they kind of go northeast, southwest. And there's about 1,200 feet of trench underneath the ground. And what will happen is the buildings will be served, kind of like a sewer line. It'd be a sewer main running down the street to a septic tank, be located down here in the cul-de-sac. Because the system is over 2,000 gallons per day, it requires to be pressure dosed. So although we could feed it by gravity because of the elevations, we have to pressure dose it. So in addition to that septic tank, there's also a pump chamber there, which will pressure dose the system, which pressure dose means that now when you flush your toilet, it goes into the tank and trickles into your system. Pressure dose, what it does is it measures a dose based on on the size of the system, and maybe 4 to 10 times a day, it will dose the system. It's actually a better design. It's a better, more environmentally safe type of system. So that's it. And the system is a minimum is 50 feet off of the wetlands, 10 feet off property lines, and 10 feet off the building slabs. And they'll be, again, located in the back there. The stormwater management for the project, which I know is a concern on every project I'm on. The site, as I talked about earlier, the site has really good soils. So for purposes of design, what we've done here is we've looked at where the water goes today. So where the water goes today is, of course, it goes into the wetlands, it goes off to the north, and it goes off to the east a little bit here, because as I said, there's a hill that comes up here. So we look at each of those areas, and we see how much the rate and volume of water that leaves the site. And because of the really good soils we have here, there's actually very little water that leaves the upland portion of this site. For the smaller storms, up until like the 10-year storm, the number's basically 0. And even for the 100-year storm, it's less than 1, which for all intents and purposes, it's 1, because it's, whole numbers are really the best you can do for drainage. So what we had to work with, that's what we have to work with. We have to kind of replicate that existing runoff pattern. So what we've done here is, as I talked about earlier, the fact that we found the groundwater relatively deep and we found the soils very pervious. So what we're going to do is we're going to have two different types of systems on this site. The first system will be each of the structures, each of the buildings, or each of the actually homes will have their own roof runoff recharge system. So when the water comes off the gutters, it will go into some flexible piping and then into plastic chambers, probably. We haven't done the final design for each of the buildings. So each of the buildings, all of the runoff from the roofs, et cetera, the roofs will go into those individual systems. So there's 10 buildings, I think. So there are, I think, 20 systems, because we have 2 per building, except for the single family one that only has 1. So that is one system. The second system is the one we have to design in order to capture the runoff from the roadways and the driveways. So that system is going to be for somebody looking at the site, it looks like a regular catch basin manhole system. And as Mike talked about, the road comes up, and right about here, it peaks, and then it starts to go down. So it comes up, and it goes down. So because of that, what we're going to do is we'll have 2 different systems on the roadway. We'll have one system down in this area here, and then we're going to have one system in this area there. And you'll have catch basins that capture the runoff. And then the catch basins, what they'll do is they'll cycle the water through a water quality structure, storm scepter, contact. There's a bunch of different ones. And what that does is, by routing it through the catch basin and then routing it through that structure, we're required, before it gets to the infiltration system, to have a minimum of 44% total suspended solids removal, the dirt removed from the water before it gets to the infiltration basins. And that will more than meet that standard before it gets to the infiltration system. What we're proposing for the infiltration system on both of these is that there'll be 48-inch diameter plastic pipes that are perforated. And it's approximately 560 feet of this pipe split between these 2 systems. So they'll be underneath the pavement. The water will come into the catch basins, go into the storm scepters, or whatever the water quality inlet is, go into these basins and infiltrate into the ground. So all of the storm water, all of the water coming off driveways, all of the water coming off the private roadway, all of the water coming off the roofs is being infiltrated into the ground. The systems will be designed to capture it and infiltrate all of the water up to the 100-year storm, which is about 7 inches of rain in 24 hours down here. So really the only water you'll see leaving the site in any direction, which will be to the the north or west or just to the north will be stuff coming off lawns. And so that will balance out what's there today with what we're proposing to do. We do also have, because it's prudent, a prudent thing to do, and it's, you just have to do it, is we have overflows for both of those systems. This system down here, if there is some type of storm that overwhelms the system, there's a pipe that will run off into the wetlands over here. And it will have to be a really, really large storm for that to happen. Down here, in the street, in the roadway, there's a drain system, and I forget the size of the pipe. I think it's a 24-inch pipe. It starts on this driveway here to Aquarian, and then runs down the west side, the left side as we're looking at this. And it's, maybe I'll just go over here. So it runs down the west side. There are some catch basins and manholes, and then it dumps off to the northeast. So it dumps off to the east. Again, the only reason we'd be tying into it is for an overflow system. So if we get a storm that the intensity or the volume is greater than the 100-year storm, which is the max design, that would be in use at that time. I think that concludes my portion, if there's any questions.
We'll keep going, and then we'll...
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn over to Dan Mills, who's talking about traffic.
Hi, good evening. For the record, my name's Daniel Mills. I'm a principal traffic engineer with MDM Transportation Consultants. We've conducted a traffic impact assessment for the residential development on Main Street. Just to orientate you to the roadway network, Main Street is a north-south roadway with the site on the westerly side. This would be Highfield Road to the south, Prospect Street a little further south, the South Elementary School to the north. As part of our traffic assessment, we reviewed existing traffic volumes on Main Street, travel speeds, crash history. We also reviewed sight line relative to the driveway location. We estimated or approximated the number of new trips that would be added from this development, which directions they would go, whether they would turn left or right out of the driveway. With regards to the existing traffic volume, our traffic counts were conducted, and they projected approximately 1,500 vehicles during the peak hour. We look at the morning peak hour and the evening peak hour. Those are the time periods when the roadway is most heavily traveled, the typical commuter peak hours, if you will. The traffic counts were conducted between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon to capture that peak hour. With respect to the trip generation estimate for the project, we rely on the trip generation manual, which is published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's an industry standard used, and we applied it in this case for the residential development, specifically the townhouse style. The trip generation manual has a whole host of different land use categories, including office, education facilities, retail facilities, restaurants, and whatnot. Obviously, we selected the residential application for this particular development. It is a 20-unit development, and contrary to popular belief, there will not be 40 cars that will be exiting during the peak hour. Most people think that because there are, the family would have 2 cars and everyone would leave at work at the same time. That just doesn't happen. And that's for a host of reasons. One may be the person works off shift or may leave before the peak hour or after the peak hour. They may work from home. They may not work at all. So it's a whole host of reasons why we will not see 40 cars leaving during 1 hour. In fact, our estimates are during the weekday morning peak hour, typical of a residential type of development, we're not going to see everyone coming into the development in the morning. We see most people leave the development. In this case, we see approximately 12 vehicles exiting the site. And we relied upon the U.S. Census information relative to where people work who live in Hingham. And based on that information, we have estimated that about 40% of those people leaving the site will travel to the north, and approximately 60% will travel to the south. That has to do with population, travel routes, and again, where people typically work who live in Hingham. Conversely, in the evening, the majority of people will be entering the site, coming back from work or an errand, and we are estimating approximately 11 vehicles entering during the weekday evening peak hour, and approximately 5 folks leaving the development for really a range of about 14 to 16. So if we call it 15, we're looking at about 1% additional traffic be added to the roadway, with about, as I said previously, about 1,500 vehicles are already traveling along that route. With regards to, we'll change the board for me on the right side. With regards to the site distance, leaving to the actually, I'm just going to orientate you to this board. The Main Street is now going left to right, and our driveway is coming up from the bottom here. We rely on the AASHTO criteria for determining whether there is sufficient site distance to and from a driveway. We want to see if there's folks traveling along Main Street can see someone exiting the driveway in either direction, and also someone who is leaving the driveway can see in both directions to leave the driveway safely. With regards to measurements that we took into the north, you can see approximately 1,000 feet to the north. The requirement is for site distance approximately 320 feet is the requirement for AASHTO, minimum requirement. To the south, there is a cluster of trees and some vegetation which would be the southwest quadrant of the driveway. That will need to be removed in order to have sufficient site distance to the south. With regards to vehicles traveling along Main Street to the north, there's approximately 400 to 500 feet of site distance to be able to see the intersection, which falls within the range, greater than the 320 feet. Again, with regards to the trip generation and the impact that this will have on the operation of Main Street itself, it's really not any material impact, given that it's a less than 1% of the existing traffic on the roadway. We do conduct intersection level service analysis, and while there are certainly surges of traffic that are really produced by the signal to the south of the site, there are, following those surges, there are adequate gaps in the traffic for vehicles to exit the site. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Engler to discuss the architecture.
Members of the board and members of the audience, I'll apologize in advance. I'm not an architect, as I indicated earlier. Unfortunately, Jim could not be here this evening, so I will do my best to stand in, but I am obviously quite familiar with our proposal. So in conceiving and strategizing relative to the overall design and what we wanted to include within our community, there were several key elements that really are the underlying driving force of what we're proposing. One is compatibility with the historic nature of Main Street. These are not intended to be reproductions of old homes, but they are intended to complement, if you will, what exists on Main Street. We also want a pedestrian scale to the clustered housing that we've provided. And obviously, we want an attractive appearance and an interior layout that appeals to a large audience. So the gabled roof forms of the buildings closest to Main Street derive their massing and the window arrangements and the general design imagery from existing historic homes on Main Street. That's, obviously there's a lot of different architectural styles, and some doesn't look like this at all, but we're certainly trying to be sensitive and think the units that we've proposed are in keeping with the look and feel of Main Street. So the architectural characteristics, the height, the gabling, the footprints and whatnot are consistent, at least in our estimation, with other homes that you'd find in the neighborhood. The homes are going to feature clapboard siding, some shingling. They'll all be, there might be a hardy type material used, which is a composite that looks like wood, that's very energy efficient, but they'll be, look like it has the appearance, they might be wood or they'll be a hardy siding, but those that are familiar with that type of product know that it has a wood appearance, not a vinyl siding or something along those nature. As I mentioned earlier, the units, many of them feature first floor master bedrooms. We think this arrangement appeals to a lot of the homeowners we're targeting. It allows for efficient zoning of heating and cooling and creates a low profile, as the images would suggest, of the second floor. As I mentioned earlier, there's no third floor on any of these buildings. So once again, we think contextually it certainly fits within the greater community. And the exterior color schemes will be muted colors. It's not, they won't be designed to stand out. They'll be designed to blend in. So, beiges, greens, sages, browns, earth tones, stuff like that. Not necessarily the most exciting colors in the world, but certainly nothing that's going to generate a violent negative reaction. So in a nutshell, I'm not even going to walk through in a future presentation. We can provide it on the overhead. You're not going to be able to see the floor plans, and certainly the people in the audience would, but it's big open kitchens, great rooms, really kind of open living, which more and more people desire, as opposed to older conventional homes which have more rooms but are broken up with walls and whatnot. There will be vaulted ceilings in the main room, and we certainly think the design is something that will appeal to many. The architect that we've retained for this has done, primarily most of his work has actually been on the North Shore in Marblehead and Manchester by the Sea. He has done a multifamily project called The Woodlands in Belmont. For those that want to research what that looks like, another one is called Johnson Woods in Reading. But I think once people have a chance to look at those, they'll see that it's a very high-quality project, or product, I should say. And then the rendering over here, basically what that is the existing condition. Granted, it was taken in January, so there's no foliage, but we dropped in from our site plan, basically the front three buildings, so somebody going by Main Street can kind of get a sense of what it will look like. And as we mentioned, the setback of this unit right here is about 20 feet beyond what currently exists there. So we've attempted to be certainly sensitive and aware and anticipate what concerns from the community will be. Obviously, we expect, there'll be some opposition to various elements. We expect that and hope through the iterative process that we can discuss all those details. Just in closing, I mean, if you look at this 500-foot radius plan, I mean, to me, what stands out is, you know, obviously there's this wetland feature, but it's the amount of residential homes in the area. I mean, there's not farms. I mean, this is obviously conservation land. There's a Lutheran church right here. There's a commercial user across the street. But there's a lot of residences in the surrounding community, and all of these neighborhoods right here are, I mean, those are, you know, 12 to 15,000 square foot lots. Certainly, you know, by many in Hingham standards, modest. So we think if looking, you know, at our project, granted it's a higher density than the surrounding community, but not significantly, and certainly based on what's been permitted in Hingham in the past, it's at or below those densities. So we think that it's a terrific project. Like any good mixed income project, when it's done, if it's ever, you know, knock on wood, you're not going to be able to tell it's a 40B or mixed income or what is it, whatever it is. People that go in or go by are just going to say, well, that, you know, we would hope they would say those are visually appealing houses. So that's our objective. We feel good about our proposal, but we certainly understand this is the first night. We've already received some constructive comments from the town. We would expect to receive more. We understand the peer review process. We're certainly receptive to those comments and hope over the course of the public hearing process and receiving that information that we can further improve and enhance the project. So in that, I think that concludes our presentation. We're certainly happy to take questions from the board or the audience.
Terrific. Great. So I would compliment Mr. Engler and Mr. Engler for not only the presentation, but for the team that you've assembled. Very informative, very helpful for the process. What I'd like to do is have my fellow board members, at least on a preliminary basis, ask some questions. We've got members of the planning board here who I would invite to ask questions, and then members of the audience. And we will do this all within the context of knowing that this is the first of several hearings. And so to the extent that someone has a question that has not been either answered or fully addressed, there will be ample opportunity for that to happen. And the applicant has made it very clear that they are receptive to the process and want to make sure that there's good communication, that they hear your comments, you hear their responses, and that the process is, as he described it, an iterative process, so that the end result will be something that people at least understand if they don't agree with it. So with that, Joe, do you want to ask anything?
Well, I
at
guess
this
there's a
point?
couple of things. First, I guess we are going to be getting independent peer review. We've
Yes.
established that, so I don't know if we've made those arrangements yet, but, okay. Just a few preliminary comments from looking through the package over the past week or so. The septic, I understand the soils are good, and you've done some test pits. I would feel a lot more comfortable, since we're sitting in effect as the Board of Health here as well, and we're getting into that time of year, to have some good septic test pits, you know, just go through that whole process that you would do to permit any septic system. So we understand just where that seasonal high groundwater is. We understand what the percolation rates are. The soils are good, probably good percolation rates. I'd be a little concerned, and I'd like to see some more information on the potential for breakout from these slopes towards the wetlands, towards the abutting properties. Issues like that related to the septic, because it is, you know, it's a larger system in a concentrated area. It's on that slope. You're sloping down, so I'd certainly like to see that. moving over to the traffic, stopping site distance was the first thing I thought of when I drove past the site. And we've addressed that. 300 to 400 feet, I remember, for northbound, for the northbound traffic. The stopping site? 400 to 500, right. And that's at 40 miles an hour, or? Okay. All right. I mean, I'm going to have more questions over the time, but those are the first few things that really jumped out at me, so, the septic in particular, so.
Yeah. Picking up on the traffic question, you've got the site distance, but if a lot of the, people are leaving in the morning, I think the trip distribution was 6 of the cars would go north during.
It was about 46, 40 to the north.
Oh, 40, okay, 40 to the north.
Right, and the total of 12,
40%.
so it was 40%.
Right, okay. And is that, while you have the sight lines that presumably are okay by traffic engineering standards, queuing up on that driveway to make those left turns, is that something that your analysis indicates is going to be, a challenge or a daily frustration for people trying to get out? Because crossing Main,
I think many share that daily frustration.
We should just say that we all lived off
Yeah.
in South Hingham for years. and
so getting.
We know that intersection.
Getting onto Main Street when you're trying to go across a lane of traffic, it is just always a challenge, and so I too kind of was trying to imagine, the sight distances without getting out of my car, but trying to cross a lane of oncoming traffic is always a challenge. I just didn't know if your traffic analysis indicated during the peak when people are, most anxious to get to work, and maybe if there was queuing up on that driveway, if your analysis indicated that might be a problem for your own residents. So that was one question I had. The other is, and I shared Mr. Fisher's feelings that this was a very informative initial presentation. Thank you very much. In going through your application, you did indicate that you'd be looking for various waivers. Could you maybe just summarize for us what the major waivers are that you'd be looking for, just so we can kind of have that in our minds?
Would you like me to subjectively identify the
Yeah,
major ones?
subjectively is fine, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, obviously, for any 40B project, this is not a multifamily district, so we're obviously
Yeah.
asking for this use to be allowed there. Relative to dimensional waivers, we only have one dimensional waiver, and that's a side yard setback, and it's really for, you don't have the site plan up there, but it's really for the unit that is closest to 893 Main Street, which is the Sullivan property. So that is the only dimensional waiver that we're requesting.
Is that the 17-foot one?
Yeah,
the 17-foot,
Because
yeah.
you're going from 20 to 17.
Right, but every other
Yeah.
dimensional requirement will comply with. There are some zoning bylaws relative to distances between units, which we're seeking waivers from. For instance, no two structures shall be less than 35 feet apart. Some of our structures at the closest point are about 15 feet apart, so that's, significant difference. So there's a couple of those in terms of not from the property line, but the interior element of the site. We're obviously proposing a common septic system, which will need a waiver to allow. It is a proposed private way, not a public way, so we're asking to follow well, for any 40B DEP stormwater management standards for that particular configuration, not the local bylaw. And then there's some waivers from, general bylaws, not the zoning bylaws. Obviously, we're asking for the zoning board to act in place of the Board of Selectmen, which is common for any 40B process. We're asking for a waiver to allow for activity to occur within 100 feet of the resource area. We obviously need to comply to state DEP standards, but that's a waiver from local Hingham zoning bylaws. And there's several along those lines relative to the local wetlands bylaws. So, as I said, Todd, I can run through all of them. It is in section 9 of the application. I think as we talk in detail about some of the engineering and whatnot in greater detail and site planning, some of it's obvious in terms of why those bylaws are being requested. I mean, quite frankly, for a lot of them, we wouldn't have any proposal if we had to adhere to some of those bylaws, but I mean, that's the whole point of 40B. So I don't know if that satisfied your
That was a good,
question,
that was a good
but-
opening response. I
Right.
appreciate that. And I only had one other question. I'm sure there's a good answer for it. I look at sort of the two houses up on the northern side of the roadway just before the cul-de-sac. And we have, that's kind of where we've got the most bunching, so to speak. It's also closest to the septic area. There's probably a very good topographic reason for it, but was any thought given to kind of straightening out that the roadway and maybe flipping one of the houses back to the southern side to give a little more elbow room so that,
So just to make sure I see what you're saying.
yeah.
So you're talking about these two that are bunched?
Correct.
And you're talking about maybe moving the road?
Yeah, just the geometry of the roadway, and
Yeah.
is there a good reason for that?
I'll defer to my colleague on this one, but I mean, I do know that we look carefully and determine that the configuration of the roadway takes into consideration to the greatest extent possible the natural terrain. So moving the roadway would require more excavation, cut and fill and whatnot. I don't want to speak for Mike, I'll let him answer that. I mean, one thing we did aspire to do is, the houses are on the southern side of the roadway, or the majority of them by design, in that the distance from our abutters on Highfield are significant in terms of how far our structure are from those houses I mentioned earlier. I mean, they're all much closer to each other than they'll be to our houses. So with the exception of the front duplex, which is still, I don't have it in front of me, but well over 100 feet between the first unit on Highfield and the first unit on the northern side of our roadway. So I don't know if, Mike, if you have anything to add relative to the location of the roadway?
Mike Sardina again with Brown Sardina, Landscape Architects, Planners. I think part of that also, not only is it related to the sensitivities to the topography, but we also wanted to try to have the relationships of building to building to building not be one where it's basically a straight line of units with all the same setbacks, because we're pretty tight relative to the amount of dimension we actually have to give between the road edge and the face of the garages. So to some degree, what we were trying to do is not have just a straight shot in from the aesthetic standpoint. I mean, I understand your point
Okay, yeah, no,
relative to the spacing of the
Yeah, I'm
buildings,
just
but,
look-
I mean, it would probably work, but we thought that that was a better trade-off
Okay.
aesthetically.
Yeah, and the septic, what I can barely see is the lines for the septic system. And those are close to the foundation walls of the houses, right?
But they're all within the setback requirements of the foundation walls and structures.
Okay.
Yeah,
They're outside the requirements.
Outside, yeah.
I'm not sure what I did with my pointer, and the residents of Highfield would know better than I would, but...
That pen's not going to work, Jeff.
Someone's got it. Someone's got it.
This unit right there?
Yep.
that
Yeah.
house,
Yeah.
That house is actually the closest to us, but to the best of my knowledge, as of several months ago, it still remains abandoned, deserted, or whatnot. No? I misspoke then. There's a house close to... Oh, it's been demoed?
Okay, well, we'll have the
All
audience
right, we'll have the audience.
participate
I
later. Okay.
apologize then, so anyway,
Okay.
forget that point.
But just, if you could stay there, because as you went through the list of waivers in response to Todd's question, and I'm looking at what you've got in the booklet, the thing that stands out to me is the point that Joe Freeman raised in terms of, in many ways, we're being asked to sit here as the Board of Health, because I think the largest number of waivers relate to septic systems and Board of Health issues, which is not the usual situation in these 40B procedures. So we are going to be paying a fair amount of attention to that. Thanks.
Point noted.
Yeah.
I mean, to the extent that we need to satisfy you or your
Yeah.
peer reviewer, we understand and appreciate that.
Okay.
So I'd like to call on
I
the...
have one more thing,
Oh,
sorry.
sure.
While we were on the subject of the road, can we just talk about the proposed width of the road? And having gone through the past 2 months and 2 winters ago, where are we putting the snow?
There should be to the north
Okay.
of the property. I mean, that's all going to be landscaped area, so that can all be plowed.
Okay. And the width, as I read it, was 20 feet?
20 feet with, I believe, a 12-inch Cape Cod berm.
Okay, so
Which
not
obviously is, less than a subdivision road, but as
Right.
this is a private road, it's basically a driveway.
Right. I mean, even a standard aisle width in a parking area under the bylaw is 24 feet for two-way flow. So it seems a little tight, but I suppose we can look at that too, so.
Tight, and that's the width without snow.
Correct,
Right.
correct. We know how some parking spaces in some of the retail spots around town seem to shrink when we get big snowstorms, so.
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
With
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Right.
Do members of the planning board wish to assist us at this point with questions? And if you do, please come to the podium so that members of the audience can hear.
Good evening, Gary Tonhorftick with the Planning Board. I just had some questions on primarily the roadway. This is a subdivision roadway would be significantly wider than this in terms of the right-of-way, but also would be significantly wider relative to the paved area. And I'm
Can you move the mic closer?
Oh,
I'm just not sure. I could hear you.
Sure. I'm concerned about if there are 20 cars and there are guests, and where do people park if there are cars that aren't part of the units? And then also, I'm looking at if there are 2 cars for each unit and they're parked in the driveways, there really isn't much room, much available public space between the units, in the public area of the units. And so my first question is on the roadway width, and what does that mean in terms of safety and accommodation of guests and what have you. The other thing is in terms of sidewalks. It looks like there's a sidewalk on the north side of the roadway, but not one on the south side. I don't know if I'm reading the drawing correctly.
I think that's right, Gary.
That's clear. The other question is, in the sightline, there's some proposed grading on Main Street at the entrance driveway to the south of the driveway, and that grading is on the public shoulder. And I'm wondering how much of the screening does that grading remove, i.e. trees and vegetation, which is currently in the rendering, screening the project from Main Street, and what would be the impact of that. The other, in looking at the grading and looking at the landscape, how the grades are being treated, the site essentially has some fairly steep gradients. As you come in, it goes up, and then it goes down into a little bowl, and then it goes back up again, and then down as you're at the west end. And all of that is being fundamentally regraded into a plateau. But the grades adjacent to the units, from the front of the houses to the back, on the north side, are pretty steep going down, and pretty flat, but then steep going up. And then there's some retaining walls at the east end of the property. The two units on the north side have some pretty significant retaining walls to the adjacent properties, and then to the south, there's some pretty significant grades. And my point is, I'm just thinking of available area for people, for kids to play, or for people to use the yards, because if there are significant grades and the houses are very close together, I'm not sure how well that's going to work in terms of access to property to use. What I'm thinking is that it looks to me, if there were a lot of children in this development, that fundamentally the play space, because of the grading, is in the roadway. And then that would go back into the safety issue relative to the width of the roadway. The only other comment I would have relative to the design of the units is I'm wondering, the roofscape and massing on the units is very high, much higher than you typically see in units, and that's going to read above the screened area. So when you look in, you're going to see a lot of roofscape, which to me is a little different than what you see normally on some of these houses. And I just was questioning, is there another massing, or can the roofscape be a little lower, the second floor, how that's all treated? It's more of a massing question, but those would be my initial questions. Thanks.
Terrific.
Thanks, Gary.
Any other, there are 4 members of the planning board here, and they are normally not bashful in coming up. So, Paul, you want, please?
Bob, I thought you said we weren't going to see you again. Jeez. Forgive me for being late. I take it you're assuming that there are going to be children living in these units? 3-bedroom?
Actually, let me respond, and if I get it wrong, you'll correct me. This is not an age-restricted unit, although their expectation is that it will likely be older families that are living there.
All right, well,
Empty nesters.
I guess the
Empty
point
nesters.
it's just a question, it's not a comment.
Okay.
We have 4 affordable units, they're 2 bedrooms, typically you'll get a school-age child in those. So let's say there's 4 to 5 children. That's all we're saying.
Out of 20 units?
Also, we more seniority.
Right, I mean, there's not going to be a restriction on age, and so at this point, I'm not hearing the applicant making a warranty as to how many people, how many kids, and...
Right, I think that you gentlemen realize every time there's that kind of representation, the facts usually spin out to be quite different. So we can assume that there will be children unless you put some kind of restriction on it. My question, though, is focused on, is there any provision or design within the application that's calculated to get the child that does live here across Main Street, assuming they inevitably go to South School? What's the plan for that?
Please. Yeah, just so everyone can hear you, that'd be great.
That was a comment meant, raised, I forget, someone from the town submitted it to us, and we acknowledge, in the next iteration, we will show a crosswalk that meets ADA standards and is compliant with expectations and the like, so.
Has the applicant met with the Highway Department with respect to any of the work that it anticipates or contemplates doing on Main Street?
No, I haven't.
Not at all. Is there any kind of fire hydrant envisioned or proposed for this?
There's 3 hydrants proposed, and we didn't mention it, and there's been some comment about the safety of the roadway, and I certainly do not want to speak on behalf of the department, but we have met personally once and spoken to at an additional time more recently with the fire department that has looked at this plan and said it looked good, and I paraphrase, it looks good to us, so.
And in terms of the width of the roadway for the fire trucks, was there any, they were fine with it?
Yeah, but we would expect them
Sure.
to issue a formal letter.
Yep.
Well, what was it that you asked the fire department to pass on? The overall design or any particular aspects of it?
Cul-de-sac, turn around, the trucks could access all the houses and turn around the cul-de-sac.
So they applied the template that they used for the Quint? Anything else? And is this a fill project? Are you bringing in fill for this project? Yeah, I noticed you asked for a waiver for that, so what's up with that?
Why don't you just stay up there?
I mean, at this point in time, with the preliminary nature, I can't answer that. I mean, our goal is to balance the site as much as possible. Mike might have a better sense, but we certainly will endeavor to provide that information, but at this point in time, I just don't know.
You're asking for a waiver, though, aren't you?
We are.
Is there going to be a retaining wall built on Walter Sullivan's side of this?
On his side, in terms of on our property towards his house? Yes.
I'm sorry, which side is that?
It's on the south
North
side.
The
Well,
south
the
side of your-
lower side, where more of the
His south side, your north side?
yeah, well, the lower side, the upper
Okay.
half,
So,
yeah.
I just want to be sure that I know
yeah, so
what you
let's be
mean.
clear. So you're
All
talking
right, so
about.
there will be a retaining wall right there. Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking about, no, the Sullivan property is up here.
Right.
Right, all right,
Talking about a
so,
wall here?
no, partial.
Right.
Well, could you give us some sense as to what that wall would look like in terms of its height, its width, the appearance as to, you know, from Mr. Sullivan's perspective?
And that may be something, if you want to address that subsequently, if you're not.
Just trying to recall.
Sure.
There's a wall, a small piece of wall right here, which is retaining high ground on the north side. There's a piece of wall.
Yep,
here in the
yep.
corner, which is retaining our property, which is higher than that ground. So,
Does any of the design of this roadway rely upon the presence of that wall? Just the houses?
yes, the grading associated with the houses is what's grading.
And what's the distance from the back of the houses to that wall, as it's shown on the plan?
12 feet to the wall.
And what's the drop-off?
Drop off the distance from the top of the wall to the bottom wall. It varies because the contours are crossing the property line at an angle, so the top of the wall can step with the contour lines.
What's the highest
So
point?
let's just say 3 feet.
That's the highest?
Yeah, 3 feet, 4 feet. There are walls associated with this area too, on the entrance.
Are you going to have fencing on the top of those?
We will have, not only, we'll either have them parapet height or we'll have fencing, and there'll also be a guardrail.
And where does the water drain to on this?
Just so this is not a private discussion, we need to, if you could get closer to the mic and try to project so that everyone else can hear it.
My question is, where does the water generated from this project drain to?
Okay, you want to answer, Bill?
You the engineer.
I am, thanks. The water currently on this site drains off mostly to the northwest, to the north, drains off to the east a little bit, drains into this hole here, and drains slightly off to the north in this area as well. And the way we're going to capture it is each of the buildings will have their own roof drain system, which will infiltrate into the ground for each of the buildings. And then the roof runoff, or the runoff from the roadways and the driveways will be going to two subsurface drain systems, one in this area and one in this area.
And are they serviced by a vacuum truck?
Yeah, those storm scepters, or whatever the type of water quality inlet eventually gets used, will require servicing, as will the catch basins.
And that would be up to the homeowners association?
Yes, because it's a private road.
Street lighting?
We show a, I have to talk to, we show a gas, like a gas lamp look type of street light in the area, and I think, I'm not sure how many we have. There's probably 3 or 4 down the length of the road, but they're not their Cobra head type of system, and I don't think we've chosen the actual design yet. We've just given a general description of it.
Do our plans show the streetlights?
Yes.
It shows the location,
They
not
do.
the,
Right.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
not the
Okay.
detail.
Now, on the plan, you've got some kind of structure underneath the roadway? What's that?
That's the drainage, this is the drainage system down in this area here, what you were just pointing to. There's a drainage system here, that is that, and then the big block-looking things. One is a septic tank, and one is a pump chamber, and they go out to the system, which is out in the back here.
Are you requesting a waiver from that? I don't think we allow that typically.
Yes.
You are. All right. I don't want to take up all your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, if there are abutters or neighbors or concerned members of the community who have a comment or question, this will be your first of several opportunities to speak. When I call you, you'll please come up to the podium, give us your name and address, and then ask your question. Yes, back there.
How you doing? My name is Jeff Deedy. I live at 5 Southgate Lane. I just have a few concerns. I think most of our neighbors do as well. First thing is this isn't really about whether or not it's 40B. How much the units cost, none of us really care. It's just about how many there are. I think they're planning on building, would you say 2,100 square feet to 2,500 square feet? But there's 40 of them. Or, excuse me, there's 20 of them. So I mean, that's upwards of 44,000 square feet of house that's proposed to be built. So it's not that they're small or quaint or they're going to be pretty. It's that there's too many of them. My main concern myself is I live on the south side of those wetlands, and I currently have flood insurance because we have wetlands behind us.
Mm-hmm.
And those amount of units will absolutely tax the wetlands, and it will affect everyone in our neighborhood. So I think that one of the things is there'll be more people who need flood insurance in the long run. And also, the idea that all the road drains, all the catch basins will eventually work their way into some sort of underground drainage thing that won't affect anyone is ridiculous, because right now, currently, most of Westmoreland and Southgate Lane, all those catch basins drain through my property. So I can see how much water comes off of those. There's a drainage easement that goes through, and I mean, I can see when it rains, I can see it. It's like a torrent. And all of those are eventually proposed to go into catch basins, which are nothing but holding tanks. And eventually those things fill up, and the water ends up getting discharged in their quote-unquote overflow area, which is my backyard. And it's a lot of these people's backyards as well. And I think that's it. A couple other things. They requested to make it a private road, private way, And it sounds like that is so that they can avoid some of the requirements of a regular road. I think that's what they mentioned. Is that correct?
That's not the reason that it is a private road.
Right, but
So-
are the requirements for the drainage and the runoff different for a private road versus a regular road?
No.
No.
Okay. And then my only other question was, isn't there currently a moratorium where they cannot open Main Street?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know how they would get any services off the road.
Well, they're asking for a waiver for that.
Right.
Oh, some more waivers. Good luck.
It's the answer to your question.
Yes, over there.
Hi, I'm Julian Bobrowski, 23 Westmoreland Road. I have similar concerns to Jeff, but my concern also is with the water runoff and coming, because I'm on that side of where the water's gonna come down on the backside. Our septic systems are back there. We don't need any water table rising back there, because all the houses around that wetland, a lot of the septic systems are in the back of the houses, and the water tables back there now are just barely underneath our septic systems. We don't need any more. And the other concern, some of the people have pools, they're a little concerned about that. The third thing I had a concern about was that gigantic septic system and our water treatment plant across the street. If a single house septic system fails, big deal. If that thing fails, could that impact our water treatment plant across the street? Since there is a waterway going under Main Street right there? Thank you.
I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we're going to be having consultants look at to get to the bottom of. So I appreciate your raising that. Anyone else at this point? This is not your last chance. Yes, yes, ma'am.
My name is Carol Schuler. I live at 1075 Main Street, the corner of Notre Dame Academy. I've lived there for 50 years, almost. My concern is traffic. It's almost a mile from South School to the middle school, and it's very dense. We have 3 religious buildings. We have the Lutheran Church, the Resurrection Church, and the temple. We have 3 schools, the South School and the Middle School, which carry over 2,000 students daily, back and forth in sports and everything. Then we have 2 nursery schools, a garden centre, and then closer to Queen Anne's Corner we have a housing project on the right-hand side and a new one that's going to be built on the left-hand side. And I really think that our small section of Main Street is already overloaded. The project sounds very nice, but I think the location is very wrong.
Good evening. Walter Sullivan. I reside at 893 Main Street, we're the abutter closest to this proposed project. We submitted today to the board a report from a review engineer that we had look at this, Merlin Associates. It's a report dated today. We also gave it to the applicants. I wanted to touch on some of the concerns that we have, specifically as set out in the report. The 12-foot retaining walls they have on the entrance, according to our engineer, are a serious safety concern for northbound traffic. Moreover, the retaining walls that are closest to our property, according to our engineers, are not constructible. There's serious erosion there now, pre-construction. According to our engineer, that soil won't maintain those retaining walls. There's going to be serious fall off into our property. Moreover, our septic system is on the side of our home, closest to this.
Yep.
And the catch basins as designed for the drainage would make our septic system not compliant with Title V. We think that should be looked at very carefully for a lot of the concerns that our neighbors have also expressed. This is too close to our septic system. In addition, the floodplain was redrawn in 2012 by FEMA. In fact, it encompasses my neighbor's property at 883 Main Street on the other side. According to Merrill and Associates, these plans are not using the new floodplain. I think that that should be looked at more closely. I think that's a concern. And with respect to traffic, we bought the house in 1999, and the first thing we did is we put in a horseshoe driveway to make egress and ingress into the property more safe. We have 3 young children. Our neighbor just moved in a year ago at 883, and she's just done the same thing. There are 5 schools in close proximity to this project. Our engineer noted that the traffic study was done in July, obviously when the schools aren't in session. Largely, most of the data comes from July. I think that's pretty significant. Anybody who travels this roadway with regularity knows during the peak drop-off and pickup times for South Elementary School and the other schools, the nursery school that's nearby, has significant impact. In addition, they need to take into account services on Sundays for the Lutheran Church, Resurrection, and the Temple down the street, has significant impact. Our engineer also says that the sightline distance is not 300 feet, it's 279 feet, which makes it a consideration. This area is rated in F on level of service in the 8F scale, so this is a significant concern. And generally overall, I heard the applicant indicate that this is already a dense area looking at the plan. For that reason, they're just making it more dense. And this is really using a shoehorn to wedge multiple amount of housing into a very small and limited area that has serious environmental and traffic concerns. So I would ask that the board give that great consideration during its review. Thank you.
Thank you. Before the next comment, can someone respond with respect to using the current flood plan data, 2012, is it?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Buckley from Bay Colony. The FEMA flood maps were revised in July of 2012. And the flood, as I talked about, the flood elevation, it's called a Zone A. And a Zone A is a flood area, but this Zone A did not have what's called a base flood elevation determined. So they just kind of, if you ask them how they do that, they'll tell you they use vegetation. So as I said, you look at it and it climbs up the hill 20 feet. So we knew it was wrong. And what we did is we did a calculation of what the real flood elevation would be for the 100-year storm. We filed that with FEMA, and FEMA agreed with us and changed the base flood elevation for this particular property to an elevation of 99 feet.
And when was that?
January, February this year?
Of this year, okay.
Yeah, that's included in the application here.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. There was someone over here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jason Ryan. I'm the abutter directly to the west of Lot 901. I live at 16 Brewster Road. And from March through May, the proud owner of a hardworking sub pump in the Liberty Pole neighborhood. I wanted to just highlight, both for the zoning board, the applicants and the folks in the audience, including many of my neighbors, what is within the 50-foot buffer zone of the wetlands that we all sort of live behind. Parts of 4 units, A16, B16, A18, and A19. Part or all of 5 subsurface roof runoff catch basin systems, 1 outfall from the stormwater overflow, and the septic distribution field is right up to that 50-foot line. A member of the board earlier mentioned the possibility of failure, and we love the fact that Hingham light plant keeps our lights going when other towns are out for weeks at a time, but a power failure in that pump system, I think, is something to be very concerned about. So I just wanted to highlight those issues. Hope we have a chance to discuss them further with the Hingham Conservation Commission.
Terrific. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Dennis Bama. I live at 13 Constitution Road. Amongst a lot of stuff that was brought up, I have a concern about the septic system also. If my information is correct, if you look at the corner of Cushing and Derby Street, where they built those new buildings a few years back, I guess they had a failure in their septic system, and if you look at all the trees that are there, are now dead. And if this system fails, all the wetlands that we have between where this project's going all the way over to Constitution is in jeopardy of the same situation. And there's a lot of wildlife that are back there. I'm not getting into what's there, but this could be a dramatic hazard to that whole area if this system fails, which on a good heavy rainstorm, hurricane, I could see it failing. That's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Michelle Grady. I live at 26 Independence Lane. I just actually had just two quick questions.
Adjust the mic. So you
Oh,
don't-
yeah, I know.
There we
Thank
go.
you. My first concern, and I'm sure we'll get into it in later meetings, is I have two children at South School. I'm concerned about the number of children that come in a school system that I think is already pushed to large class sizes. So I'll leave it there. That's my largest concern. This is maybe an ignorant question, but I noticed that you put the septic system with, I'm assuming it's a large leaching field that's behind there. And I know, just moving into a town and not knowing anything about septic systems, I don't know how many years you have on that, but eventually it has to be moved. And I don't know if the property design leads to, in 30 years, when you have to move your leaching field, where do you put it? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else right now? Okay. Oh, yep. If you can come up to the mic, please.
It's not us, it's the it's not us, it's the TV audience, so.
My name's Ed Jaros. I live at,
Looks like a TV
live at 12 Highfield
Wait, there's
Road.
a commercial break.
And,
Hold on, commercial break, Ed, hold on.
Okay.
There we go.
We're the family that purchased 9 Highfield Road, demolished the small 900-square-foot home there, and we're building a modest 2,700-square-foot home. Obviously, didn't expect that this was coming into my backyard. I expected at some point there'd be some development back there, probably something more like 2 or 3 private homes, which I thought would be a neat addition to the area. So the density certainly concerns me greatly. Sean Papich isn't here today, but he brought up a good point. It does look like they're really in need of, I don't want to use the word clear cutting, but removing most of the trees in order to make the uplands here workable. And then some of the grading, I don't think, is really depicted well on something of that size, but I think what you're going to do is you're going to, water that's currently falling right now into the woods is going to be falling and sloping and running through grass that's supposedly treated, I suppose, to keep it green for a community, and all down into the wetlands, which is a concern. And I think some of the grades are sharp enough that what ends up happening is, as Sean described, you can, in effect, attempt to plant, but that steep grade wears and erodes over time. It just lends itself to pushing downhill, 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 and we all know what rolls downhill. So with that said, you know, it's the density and just that really just kind of spooks the heck out of me. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Joe and Todd, do you have anything else right now? Because I've got some other things. but-
No.
Okay.
I do not.
Did the applicant want to respond to any of the other comments? You'll have a chance later, but if there's something now that you'd like to address, you're more than welcome.
Certainly, we appreciate all the comments, and we expect to address many, if not all of them, over the course of the public hearing process. I mean, I think it's worth stating that a lot of the elements to the proposal, specifically around septic, around stormwater management, are very technical in nature. It's
Yep.
not subjective on our part in that we really like the system, we're going to put it in, take our word for it. The town is going to retain a consultant to represent its interests and look at our proposal. So I don't want to say there's no subjectivity to it, but there's certainly, most of it's based on math, so there'll be communication between our civil and our site planner and whoever the town retains, John Chesney, I understand, so
Right.
I'm not telling the neighborhood to be happy about that, but they should be aware, at least, that there is going to be thorough evaluation, and we're going to have to meet established standards. It's not going to be up to the board, oh, you know, it kind of or not. So with that said, you know, we look forward, we respect the neighbors' opinions and their thoughts and whatnot, and, you know, we'll go forward through the process, and we don't, you know, have anything to hide. We want to be as transparent as possible throughout the process. We've been in touch with some abutters and exchanged information. They've asked us questions. We've been very forthcoming with what they've asked for. Hopefully they would admit to that. So we look forward to continuing the process.
Thank you.
Joyce.
Yep.
I just want to make one comment to the extent that the stormwater drainage
Yep.
has an overflow going into the town drainage system. The town does not allow that. There's a commercial property that needs to do that over on Abington Street. They're being required to go to town meeting this year to get an easement to tie into the town drainage system. So I just wanted to make that clear. I did see that come up in the
Yep.
comments, and it was mentioned today.
Thank you. Susan Murphy,
Sorry.
one of our town council, so thank you. So I really appreciate the input from the neighbors. You see things that we don't necessarily see, and you add an important perspective, so your input is valued and appreciated. At this point, I'd like to ask my fellow board members procedurally about the next step. What we have done with the prior 40B is after the opening hearing, or at the end of the opening hearing, we put the applicant on notice that we viewed that the town was in excess of its 10% requirement under 40B, and we voted to authorize town council to submit a letter, and that letter would go directly to the applicant, letting them know that, in our view, we could impose conditions or deny the application based upon the assumption, based upon our view that we have exceeded the 10% requirement under 40B. That's not a statement that we would impose such conditions or deny, but that we have the authority to do that. And if we're going to go down that route, we have 15 days from the opening of the hearing to have a letter issued to the applicant. So it would be my recommendation that we discuss and then have a vote that would authorize us to request the town council to issue such a letter to the applicant that we have in fact satisfied the 10% and that we believe we have the authority to proceed with a denial or conditions based upon that 10% excess. So, any thoughts? So will one of you, I'll put it this way, the chair will accept a motion that the board believes that a denial of the permit or the imposition of conditions or requirements would be consistent with local needs on the grounds that the statutory minima defined at 760 CMR 56.033 have been satisfied.
All right, so that is our position, that's been our position. We took that position with regard to the last our 40B that came before the board.
And several before that.
Right.
With Avalon, and several before that.
Yes. Let me just interrupt.
Go ahead.
We can have the motion, then we can have a discussion of the motion. So is there that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
So seconded.
Okay, now let's have a discussion. It's procedure.
He's a stickler for procedure.
Okay.
That's why he's the chairman.
Okay.
Every board needs a lawyer, so.
So we have followed this procedure in the past, and it would seem to me that because that is our position, this is really more just the town reserving its rights.
Right.
Putting more formally in the context of what's required from us under 40B to reserve our rights and put the applicant on notice as to where we stand. So I don't see this as anything more than being consistent with what we have most recently done. Our position's the same, and
Right.
I'm fine with that. This is kind of I expected we would have to do this.
Yeah.
Unless there is some carve-out or procedure that would say we wouldn't, and we would still reserve our rights, but if that's not, I'll look to town council on that. But if-
The DHCD regulations do not give us an option that if we want to preserve our rights, we have to go this route.
Okay, well,
And we already know and expect what DHCD's response would be in the event that the applicant elects to pursue it, because they've already done this before, but it's not a final position, so we are going through the process. So the motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
aye.
Yeah. Okay, I'll explain it, but let me first allow the applicant to ask a question.
Maybe why we think we're at 10%.
Chairman Bob Engler of SEB. I understand the regulation and the 15-day requirement to notify DHCD, with your opinion, in which we respect. What I'm not clear about is we have 15 days to appeal that. We're not going to appeal your ability to say you're over 10% and you have the right to turn us down. The only thing we would appeal is if you denied going forward and said you're not going to hear the application.
Right.
I didn't hear that in the motion, so I don't know within
Correct.
the 15-day period, you have to decide to tell us we're not going to hear you anymore, or you let us have the whole hearing. At the end of the whole hearing process, you say we're turning you down because we're over 10%. Is that the intent, or do you have to tell us within 15 days that you're over 10% and therefore you're choosing not to hear our application?
neither.
Got it. So, Susan, do you want to respond?
Yeah. The way the regulation works is the board has to send a letter to you and copy DHCD within 15 days.
Right.
If you're going to challenge that, if you don't believe the town is at 10%, you need to respond.
Right.
If you don't respond, you've waived your right to challenge that.
Correct.
And I would argue you might waive your challenge to appeal on the basis later. They're not going to say at this point in time, because they haven't done the thorough review, they don't have the review comments in, whether they would deny or condition, or they're not in the position to do that. They're saying we're at 10%, and that's what the regulations require them to do. And you would have to respond within the time frame to challenge that in order to preserve your rights going forward.
We don't want to challenge it and be sent up to DHCD
Right.
to get the same ruling you already have.
Well,
If you-
that,
Right, so
we
let-
anticipate that that's what likely happened.
Right, so let me, I do understand where you're coming from. And with all deference to Susan, we're not going to be giving you legal advice on the best way to proceed. The intention here is for the town to preserve its rights under the regulations. In the past, with other 40Bs, we have gone ahead, done the hearings, and in fact, issued the permits. That's not saying, I'm not telling you what we're going to do here. That's what we've done. We've taken the input of the town's folks and really looked at the projects to see if they've made sense. This allows us to say, we look at your project, I'll just give you an example, and say, you've got 3 structures too many, and so we think you really need to limit it. And we are not going to grant you that going from 20 foot to 17 feet, that one waiver requirement. You would be in a better position if to say, under 40B, you can't go back to your zoning. Or you can have the negotiation with us without the protection of the 40B mandatory, you can basically ignore town zoning. So we are not, at this point, taking the position that we are going to ignore the application, that we are not going to have a hearing, or that we are going to deny it. We have not taken any of those positions. And in fact, I will tell you that we are going to have hearings on this, no matter what happens. We give each applicant the appropriate respect, and the town people the appropriate respect to make sure that the process goes forward. This protects our rights. You should see what you need to do to protect your rights. We will not be offended if you appeal what we do. We will proceed appropriately regardless. And we are interested in coming out with the best result for the town. Does that answer what you
Yes,
what
I
you asked?
mean, the point is, we have to find out what's in our best interest.
Yes.
Let me just state that we will have to appeal to protect our interests. We don't want to operate on the appeal or
Sure.
carry out the appeal. We'd like to continue the hearings.
Yes.
If that can be stayed in some way, and Susan would know better than I, then we won't have to delay a
I got you.
process to go
Okay.
back to
The-
DHCD. We'll just have the hearings. If you don't like what we have and you want to
Right.
turn us down on certain things, that's the normal process
Right.
where we get to appeal or not. But it won't be 10% so you don't get any rights. That's up to us to appeal that. If you say at the end of the day, I'm sorry,
Right.
we're over it, you're done. But if we continue the hearing and work things out, that's what our intent would
Right.
be. So we'll have to probably appeal that, but somehow we'll figure
Right.
out from a lawyer telling us, you don't have to, or DHCD saying, in this circumstance, we've already made one ruling, we're not going to make
Right.
another one, so let's just keep going. We'll
Right.
find out.
Now, I think that the regulations as they're drafted is that the town loses its right to issue the denial or the conditions unless we take this step. It's not clear to me that the applicant loses any rights. So that's something that you should review. The procedure would be, since we've just passed this motion, that within 15 days, you would get a lawyer. I'm sorry, you would get a letter. You get a lawyer, whatever you want.
First
But
the
within
letter, then
15
the lawyer.
days, you would get.
Do I have to pay for a lawyer?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Joe?
That's a good thing. So you would get a letter, and if you then appeal that letter to DHCD, the proceedings under the regulations have to stop. We cannot continue with hearings. And we will have to await DHCD's response, and I believe they have 30 days from when they get your letter. And then, from their response, we would then appeal, we have the ability to appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, and the whole process is stayed. It's stopped during that process until we hear back from the Housing Appeals Committee, and then we would resume. So it's an unfortunate time period that will have to happen if there is an appeal. Our interest is not in delaying this, it's in preserving the town's rights, but the way the regulations are written, there will be that extension. So one option, if you don't want to have that long delay, is to figure out if you still have the rights, even if you don't appeal. We do the hearing, and then at the end, if you don't like it, then you can exercise. I can't tell you if that preserves all your rights, but that is something to consider.
And that was just the point I was
Yeah.
trying to make.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand
Yeah.
that they don't want to wait out that
Right.
period, but I think that they need to make sure that they're not waiving
Right.
any of their rights if they don't respond to your letter.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I know we went through this before, but I'm still confused. So can you just explain what the motion
Okay, what,
is about the letter?
what we just voted on is to authorize town council to send a letter to the applicant saying that the zoning board of appeals believes that it can issue conditions or deny based upon the town having satisfied the statutory minima, which is 10% affordable housing for the town of Hingham. And that's what we voted on. And then, under the regulations, they would have 15 days to make an assessment about whether or not they want to pursue that right now with DHCD or not.
15 days to appeal, you mean?
Correct. And if they do, then these proceedings are automatically stayed in accordance with the regulations of DHCD. Which brings us to the next procedural issue. I understand that you have the amount that we would need for consultant fees to move this along, and you should decide, knowing that you're going to be getting this letter, if you want to provide the check now, if you want to wait. Again, it's really your call, and you don't have to decide that right now. But at some point, you'll make that decision. And finally, we need to schedule a next hearing. And we can schedule it assuming that there's no appeal, and then if it turns out that there is an appeal, it'll just be stayed, and we'll have to continue. So let's look at our calendars and figure out what makes sense.
Are you looking at a 30-day, or how long would you like
Well,
to?
15 days would be when the letter would have to go out, so that would be, I don't have my calendar. so-
Well, we're talking about, it would be like around April 12th,
It'll be by April 12th, right?
which is that Friday.
Friday the 12th.
Sometime after the 12th.
What,
Well, you've already voted, so we know we're getting the letter.
exactly.
Yes.
We have to decide, and we will notify you when we've decided what we're going to do.
Right.
And that'll set the time frame, but we can pick a date, because I don't know what we're gonna do yet, frankly, so I don't see any reason not to pick a date. But if we decide to move forward, and if we send in the money, then is your estimate that the next hearing with the consultants would be on board, or you wouldn't have the hearing, so they did their report?
Well, so, good question. So assuming that you receive our letter by April 12th,
When's town meeting?
you could decide that day, or let's say on the 15th, we're going to proceed with the hearing, our lawyer says our rights are still preserved. And then we would go ahead with the consultants, and we would pick a day. I don't know if we need to have the consultants on board to have the next hearing, if there's additional information you want to provide right now.
We would prefer to have the consultants take our material,
Yep.
do their review, let us interchange with them, and then come back when they've got to report to you a week ahead of time.
Right.
And we know what it says. So.
Okay.
If your consultants say we need 3 weeks after that date, that
Right.
you send in the money, you're not going to hire until we send it to you.
Right.
So it would be a month after that.
Okay, so we're talking about May,
Yes.
and,
Probably midnight.
right, so what is
We
our,
have a meeting May 1st already, tentatively scheduled for Rockland Street
Right.
and
Mhm.
Avalon.
let's push it back another 2 weeks at
It's gotta
least.
go back another 2 weeks.
So the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th? Any,
Do you have a preference? Free?
Either week works for
do
me,
you,
so.
do you, either of you? I would,
20th.
when is Memorial Day?
Memorial Day is the,
It's the third, oh, no.
the following.
The 26th.
It's following, so I would have a preference.
27th.
The 27th?
Yeah.
So the week before, the week of the 20th, or do you want to?
Okay, so we would do it,
So
so the Wednesday night, the week of the 20th would be the 22nd.
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 That would be my preference, yeah.
That work for you?
Yes.
Work for you. So we can schedule it for the 22nd. If it turns out that there's these delays because of appeals, we'll just have to further extend it. But for these purposes, let's continue until the 22nd of May at 7.
Perfect.
And for neighbors and abutters, members of the community, we will have this posted on the zoning board website, and if there is a change, it'll be posted there as well, so you don't have to show up and the room's empty.
Well, you will have to show up.
Right, we'll have to show up to continue.
Right.
Right. Anything else? Then we are continued until the 22nd of May. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.